So, you're in the market for a new motorcycle and you've narrowed it down to either the Honda Rebel 500 or the Honda SCL500. And now, picking between the two bikes is understandably daunting because they both seem so similar and yet so different at the same time, and obviously you want to make sure that you make the right decision. Luckily for you, I own both bikes, and today I'm here to make your decision easier than ever. Now, picking between the Rebel 500 and the SCL500 is not a one-size-fits-all answer, but I believe that the most important deciding factors all easily fit into only 3 different categories: your budget, how the bike's going to fit you, and how you plan to use the bike. Today we're going to cover all 3 of those categories, but first let's take a quick look at them. In case this video is your first time ever seeing or hearing about either of these bikes, I'd be remiss not to do a quick little overview of them before we do a deep dive. So here's my 2017 Honda Rebel 500, and here is my 2023 Honda SCL500. As you can tell by the names and the engines, both of these bikes are built around Honda's 500cc platform that they've been doing since about 2013, I believe. The Rebel 500 first came out in 2017, and the SCL500 is a lot newer and just came out in 2023. So come to think of it, I didn't even realize I have a first-year bike of both of these. Seeing them next to each other, it should be very apparent what I was saying about how similar they are and yet how different they are at the same time. They share the most similarities on the front half of the bike. As I was saying, they have the same exact 500cc motor, pretty much the same exact front part of the frame. You can see that the tanks look extremely similar, almost similar bars, pretty similar forks, but as you move towards the back half of the bike, that's when the differences become very apparent. The Rebel 500 is classified as a cruiser, so you can see in typical cruiser fashion, it sports the super low seat height and almost like a bobber style rear fender, 16-inch wheels in the front and back, and some big bulby tires to fit the vibes. And then we make our way over to the SCL, which is actually classified as a scrambler, although I've kind of built mine into more of a cafe racer vibe. In its stock form, it has a big old fender that comes back here and a big high mount exhaust. As you can see, the seat height is much taller, but we'll get into the specifics of that when we talk about the fit of the bikes. This one has a big long bench seat as opposed to the single seat, and you can see that the wheels are much bigger with much narrower tires. Now, I'm sure some of you are going, yeah, that's a great comparison, but it's not that great to compare the SCL500 to the first gen Rebel 500, because the first gen Rebel 500 actually has halogen bulbs. As you can see, the lights are totally different from the Scrambler, and the second gen Rebel 500 is actually a much closer fit to the SCL, and luckily for you, that's why we have Nina's second gen Rebel 300 to show those differences. Now, although this is a Rebel 300 and not a 500, the fact remains that the frame and the body of it is the exact same as the 500, so it'll be a perfect representation. The only thing is you'll see the motor is obviously much smaller. But now you should be able to see, looking at that bike, which we consider the Gen 2 of the Rebel, it's obviously a much closer fit to what the Scrambler is. You have the same exact headlight, same turn signals. If I still had the stock rear fender on the Scrambler, you'd see that the lights are the exact same as well. So just picture this as a 500 and not a 300, and the comparison should make a lot more sense. So as you can see, this is what the Gen 1 display looks like, just super basic and bare bones. And then the SCL500 and the Gen 2 of the Rebel share the exact same display, which is upgraded and has a gear indicator. You get halogen bulbs with the Gen 1, and then both of the Gen 2s get the upgraded LEDs. Both of the Gen 2s also have slipper clutches, which make the clutch pull a lot easier, whereas the Gen 1 does not. There's also a few other small differences between the Gen 1 and the Gen 2 of the Rebel 500, and those would be slightly upgraded seats and slightly upgraded suspension. That's just harder to show because the suspension looks the same, and that's an aftermarket seat. Now, one of the interesting differences between these bikes that I wasn't expecting is that even though they have the exact same engine, like I was saying, and they have essentially the same exhaust on them, the two bikes actually sound pretty different. And I think what I figured out is because the Rebel 500 comes down and has almost like a thinner, smaller catalytic converter right there, and then has a smaller exit right there, whereas the SCL500, hopefully you can tell, has almost like a poofier, rounder, more cylindrical catalytic converter right there, and then a way bigger exit point at the end. Hopefully it shows through the camera. Tell me if I'm crazy. Okay, the Rebel first. And now the SCL. Hopefully that showed through the camera, but call me crazy, they both sound super good in their own right, but they're surprisingly different sounding. The Rebel I feel like is a little bit lower pitched and has more of a burble to it, and the Scrambler I feel like is slightly higher pitched and almost like more refined. And both the Rebel and the Scrambler both have a Kaufman's Thunder exhaust on it, so I know that's not making the difference. It's just crazy that two bikes that are so similar can have the same exhaust but sound different. And guys, speaking of exhaust, there's a good reason why we run these Kaufman's exhausts on over half the bikes that we own. Every Kaufman's exhaust is made right here in the USA to the highest standards, which if you've seen the channel before and you know how OCD in particular I am is definitely saying something. Every exhaust includes an easily removable baffle so you can tune it for sound, super high quality packing on the inside of the muffler that the knockoffs just can't replicate.
Brother, what's that?
And all that for a fraction of the cost of their competitors. I love these exhausts so much that I asked Kaufman's if they could sponsor this video for me, which they agreed to. So shout out Kaufman's for always supporting the channel and supporting my dreams. If you want an exhaust of your own, check the link in the description. Okay, now let's talk about the first of our three deciding factor categories, and we'll start off with budget. Now we're starting with budget because budget is obviously very important. Riding motorcycles is cool, but not being broke because of it is even cooler. So depending on your budget, it might kick some of the options out for you right away. We'll start off with the SCL500 because it's the easiest and only comes in one configuration, and the SCL500 comes in brand new at $6,800 before any of the fees. Then we'll move on to the Rebel 500. You can get it with ABS, which is actually the exact same price as the SCL500, coming in at $6,800, or you can get it without ABS for only $6,500, or they have the fancy schmancy SE model that comes in at $7 grand even, and that one just has an upgraded diamond stitch seat, a headlight cowl, and blacked out forks. So for the most part, the price is dead even. But the real kicker is why I was talking about the first gen of the Rebel 500. And not even just the first gen, but also the second gen, since they've been out for several more years than the Scrambler. And what that means is that the Scrambler, you're still not really going to find a whole lot of them on the used market, but Rebels have been out for 7 years. So you're a lot more likely to find them on the used market and save a lot of money. So although this Gen 1 doesn't have quite all the fancy features that the Gen 2 or the Scrambler have, I actually just picked it up for only $3,000. Let that sink in. Only $3,000. At the time of filming this, like I said, that hasn't been out long enough that you can really do that. That might change in the future, but for right now, it's a lot easier to find a good deal on a Rebel than a Scrambler. Now, don't get me wrong, that was a crazy deal that I found on that, but regardless, either way, if you go used, you should expect to save thousands of dollars. All right, now moving on to category number 2, which I think some of you will say is arguably the most important category, and that's how the bike fits you. Like we've already said, the Rebel 500 has a much lower seat height than the Scrambler does, but just how much lower, and what does that mean for somebody like me who's a little bit taller than short stuff over here? The Rebel 500 is a 27.2 inch seat height, whereas the Scrambler is a whopping 31.1 inch seat height, which is almost a 4 inch difference. How tall are you?
5'2" and 3/4".
5'2" and 3/4. Got it. Now, when I'm 5'10", 5'11" on a tall day and have a 34-inch inseam, and she's 5'2" and 3/4 and has a 30-inch inseam, damn, how'd I remember that? I got that right?
Yeah.
Obviously, those seat heights make a world of a difference, and this is where it really starts to show what I was saying, that it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. Okay, so this is what a 30-inch inseam looks like with a 27-inch seat height. Do a little pan over for you. So 30-inch inseam, 29-inch reach, I think is what we said. And this is how she fits on it. And in a second, I'll show you a comparison of her sitting on her Rebel 300 that she modified to fit her a little bit better, because with her inseam and her reach, what are some of the issues that you had with your 300?
I would get back fatigue a lot just from, like, it wasn't that the bars were far, but my elbows were not quite bent enough and I couldn't keep them in. So we put the 1-inch risers on. Are they 1 inch up and 1 inch back?
Yep, 1 inch up and 1 inch back.
Yeah, and you can already like tell the difference here, stock.
And also you have the Mustang seat, which sits you about 1 inch closer forward. So right now you're essentially losing about 2 inches of reach.
I mean, like, not to be weird, but I'll roll my sleeve up so you can see my elbow. Like, that's like my elbow's fully extended. On my Rebel, I can like pretty much, I mean, you'll show them, but I can comfortably have a lot of that and I can tuck them.
So that's what's interesting, is that the Rebel really caters towards shorter riders, but even at her height, which isn't crazy short by any means, you'll find that lots of riders actually add seats that push them further forward and bring the bars closer to them, because even though this is probably one of the best bikes for shorter riders, sometimes it's still not enough, but fortunately there's still plenty of stuff you can do to make it a little bit better. And then swapping over to someone who's 5'10", 5'11", with a 34-inch inseam and a, what did I say, 33 or 34-inch reach, something like that.
33, yeah.
We'll see the difference. Stay just like that and look straight ahead. And then you cut to my lanky ass on it and the story is much different. All right, camera lady, you want to do a quick pan around like I did with you to show them? So as you can see, I have, I think I said a 34-inch inseam and a 34-inch reach. The reach is a lot more comfortable for me than it is for her. Her arms were pretty much hyperextended and mine are nice and relaxed. But you can see, especially when I throw my leg up, it is much higher up than hers is, and it's like halfway up the gas tank. And I don't know if you had an issue with it or if you even noticed, but one of the things with the Rebel 500, which you'll see the difference with the SCL500, is that the engine case sticks out right here and the foot pegs are right there. So for the Rebel 500, your ankle's kind of hitting against it a little bit. So yeah, hopefully you can see why people say that pretty much anything over my height, anything over 5'10", 5'11", 6 foot is pushing it, I think, is too tall for a Rebel 500. For taller riders, you're gonna wanna do something like forward controls probably to give you a little bit more room, and maybe some bar risers just to bring them a little bit higher. Whereas with Nina's bike, you can see that because she has the padded Mustang seat that pushes her about an inch further forward, the risers that bring the bars about an inch closer to her, and we rotated the bars towards her a little bit, I am even more scrunched up on this than I was before, and you can tell I definitely look way too big for this, whereas for Miss Nina, it is a perfect fit. And then the immediate cutscene to the laughing red-faced Nina, because even at the stock height on the SCL500, you can see she is super duper tippy-toe action on it, and we probably cut straight to that just for a cool little transition to show you how severe the difference is, but I'll include right here her getting on it.
I don't like this one.
Tell us your thoughts about the seat height of the SCL500.
I hate it. Frankly, I couldn't ride this bike comfortably. Like, I can't even get the balls of my feet down on both. Like,
I'll pan down, I won't show your butt, I'm just showing the toes.
yeah, like that's ball foot down, but I'm all the way up.
Yeah.
And then if it was the other way, it would be like that, you know?
Yeah. And then the opposite of what you guys just saw, as uncomfortable and small as she looks on this bike, then we swap over to me, and you can see that I am right at home. At my height, this is so much more comfortable for me. The reach is just right for me. The seat height is fine. I can flat foot on both sides of the bike, and I'm not even at the most narrow part of it. And then also, you can see what I was talking about when I throw my foot up into riding position, you can see that my knee is not nearly as high as it is when it's on the Rebel, and my feet are much more tucked back into like a more aggressive riding position, and it makes this engine cover kind of go into that groove so it doesn't interfere with me when I'm riding at all. Whereas the Rebel, I was up here hitting my ankle on it, now I'm all the way back here. So personally, I love this riding position. Let me make sure that I know the kickstand is down, because I have so much more room and the seat is more of a bench seat that if I get fatigued or tired, I can scoot back here and stretch out on a ride, then I can come back up like that. I can do really whatever I need to do. So hopefully after that, you guys see a lot more of what I was saying about how it is not a one-size-fits-all answer, especially when it comes to one-size-fitting-all. And one thing I forgot to mention also is that the Scrambler is, I think, between 9 and 15 pounds heavier than the Rebel is, depending on which configuration of the Rebel you get. Now, with what I've done to mine, I'm sure this is actually probably lighter than that is now, from all the weight from the rear fender, the big stock exhaust, the passenger foot pegs. But in stock form, it is a bit heavier, and she was saying that it feels a lot more top heavy, because as you can see, I'm sitting up a lot higher than she is, so all that weight wants to lean over a little bit more, and especially when you don't have the footing that you have on that, it can be a little bit tricky sometimes. I'll let you lead us into the next segment. Just say, okay, now if the price and the size difference of the two bikes didn't make the decision for you, let's talk about the differences in what you're going to use them for.
But you just did it so perfectly.
On to the final segment. Now for the third and final deciding factor, we're going to talk about how you plan to use the bike and what you plan to get out of it. Because it does not matter how affordable it is or how well it fits you if it doesn't match your needs. I mean, that's how I ended up with all these bikes, right? I'm always justifying it, saying that each and every one of these bikes serves a different purpose, caters to a different riding style, and honestly, just between these two bikes, no matter how similar they are, the same can be said. I think they both shine in different ways. And to really show that, we're going to hop on them one by one, and I'm going to take you to where I think each of them shines the best, and we'll talk about what purpose I think each of them serves. But first, it's worth mentioning again that they are the exact same engine. I think maybe they're geared a little bit different just for like the different wheel and tire sizes, but the engine itself is exactly the same between the two bikes. So as far as performance, reliability, and miles per gallon are concerned, you're really not going to see much of a change between the two. I average about 65 miles per gallon, which as far as I'm concerned, where else can you get that much fun with gas mileage that high? And of course, like I also said, these motors have been out since like 2013, so parts availability is there, and we know that the reliability is too. Okay, now which of the two bikes should we take out first? You know what? I think I'm really feeling the SCL500 because honestly, guys, this thing is quickly becoming one of my favorite bikes that we own currently or that I have ever owned. It is just such a jack of all trades, do it all bike. I mean, like, just picture the Rebel 500 being back here doing this right now. You can stand up on it easily and just like conquer any terrain that comes your way, except for maybe this sand. Probably should have carried my speed through that, but I don't like wet sand. But I mean, like, just looking at them, you can obviously tell that this is a much more utilitarian bike than the Rebel 500 is. We've already shown how much taller it is, but the suspension itself is just so much longer than the Rebel. The front suspension is 0.4 inches longer, and the rear is a full 2 inches longer than the Rebel 500. Now, I'll stop right here and show you guys kind of one of the downsides to that, though. Or not downsides, but I guess like unrealized potential, if that makes sense. On both bikes, the lowest point on them is going to be the catalytic converter. On the Rebel 500, I measured about 6 inches of clearance with the bike fully upright in a wheel chock and no weight on it, and the SCL500 was about 6 3/4 inches. So even though you have so much more suspension travel on this versus the Rebel, you only get about 3/4 of an inch more ground clearance. But the interesting thing is that if you look over on this side, I don't think this is showing too well, but like I said, the catalytic converter is the lowest point on the bike, and hopefully you can tell that the catalytic converter actually comes down probably about a solid inch below the oil pan. So that means that if you were to put headers on this bike that did not have a catalytic converter, that in theory you could gain a whole extra inch of ground clearance, and that's actually not possible on the Rebel. I was looking at the Rebel, and although the catalytic converter is the lowest point, it's like dead even with the oil pan. So in theory, with this bike, if you put some different headers on it, you could have up to, what's the math on that, almost 2 inches more clearance than the Rebel, and make this thing even more utilitarian and badass than it is now. And guys, honestly, as badass as this thing is and how well it can handle all the stuff like this, going off-road and plowing through bushes and everything, I'm not even kidding when I say that I think it's even more at home in the twisties. This thing handles so much better than the Rebel 500, it's insane. It just wants to lean, it wants to just tear up the back roads, and it's really interesting because I feel like if you put some more street-oriented tires on it, it would be an absolute ripper, but then you could also put some like more aggressive dual sport tires on it, and I'm sure it'll tear up like the off-road stuff even more. If you guys don't already follow, dang, I forget exactly what his handle is, Ed something, but I'll put it right here. He absolutely shreds his CB500X, which is the same exact platform as this for the most part. I'm not nearly that good of a rider, but if you're a good rider, then that's really the only thing holding you back, and I don't see why you couldn't be doing that on this Scrambler. Ooh, yeah, baby. But yeah, I mean, this thing is just so nimble. You can seriously just throw this thing around like it's nobody's business. And while the Rebel is nimble for being a cruiser, you're just not gonna be able to flick it around and throw it around like you can on this, dude. This thing is just so much fun. It honestly does it all. Now, another plus side to this is that everybody complains about the Rebel 500 and how small its tank size is. It's only 3 gallons even, and this actually does have a slightly bigger tank than the Rebel. This has a 3.2 gallon tank, but with that said, yeah, it's nice that it has a slightly bigger tank, 0.2 gallons more, but like I said, if this thing is getting about 65 miles per gallon, then that 0.2 gallon difference is only like a 13 mile difference. Either way, you're gonna see in real life probably about 165 to 180 miles per tank if you're riding an average day like I ride. So personally, I like really prefer this over the Rebel 500 just for, you know, how capable it is and just how utilitarian it is. Not to say that you couldn't get down to this exact same spot on the Rebel, but it's just so much easier doing all the gnarly, just, I don't know, utilitarian is the only word I can think of, just gnarly utilitarian stuff on this. But anyway, as much as I love this bike and its riding style, and I think it just suits me personally way more than the Rebel 500 does, that is not to say that the Rebel 500 honestly might just be a way better match for a lot of you guys. As great as it is that the Scrambler has all those utilitarian qualities and everything like that, let's be honest, lots of time we're just just riding downtown like this and grabbing a coffee or just going out for a nice ride. So as much as the long travel suspension and all that kind of fancy stuff really appeals to me, it might not matter to a lot of you guys at all. And as much as I kept coming back to the word utilitarian for the SCL500, the word that I would probably use to describe this would have to be approachable. I feel like this is just such a more approachable bike, you know? Not everybody wants to have the need or feel the need to be going off-roading sometimes, and not everybody needs that, like, more of a top-heavy bike. And although I personally prefer the Scrambler, I think that there's a lot of benefits to this also. And one of the main things is that as of now, the Rebel, I feel like dude, and then they pull out in front of that car too. What the what was I saying, dude? Anyway, one of the big benefits of the Rebel 500 as of now in comparison to the SCL 500 is just the fact that I feel like it's a lot more equipped for doing longer trips. Now, don't get me wrong, I have said in the past that I think the Scrambler is more of a comfortable riding position for me, and that I could just hop on that and go for like a 1,000-mile ride without having to change anything, whereas the Rebel, I would have to change some of the ergonomics to make me fit it better. But at the end of the day, the Rebel just has so many more options for storage, namely because the SCL 500 in its stock form has that big high mount exhaust, so that alleviates the option to have a saddlebag on the right side altogether. Now, don't get me wrong, I obviously have the low mount exhaust on mine, and I have fabbed up some of those ammo can saddlebags, but obviously they're not as big as something that you could just get ready to go for the Rebel 500. So, like, for example, I mean, Nina's Rebel 500, she has big old saddlebags on it, she has a tank bag for it, she has a tail rack for it, she has big crash bars that she has a cup holder attached to. I mean, if that thing were a 500, it would be ready to just eat up miles. Whereas if you're looking to eat up miles on the SCL 500, as of now, really your only option is getting like a tank bag and a top box or something like that. Obviously, you can get a left saddlebag as well, but you don't really have just a ready-to-go option for luggage the same way that you do for the Rebel. And again, that could change in the future once the SCL has been out for a little bit longer, but I'm just speaking as of now. And kind of on that same note, if you're looking to get a bike that you want to modify and make your own, there are so many more options for the Rebel 500 right now. You can totally take the rear fender off and make it a bobber. You could put some risers and a 2-up seat on it and make it almost like club style, kind of like how my Rebel 1100 is. There's just so many different options to make the Rebel your own versus the Scrambler. You just kind of, I don't know, it is what it is, unless you want to do something like I did and turn it into more of a cafe racer vibe. And circling back to the idea of just how approachable the Rebel is, what I'm doing right now is kind of just like one of my favorite things to do on the Rebel 500 is just to vibe, come downtown, get a coffee, and you just have like more of like a relaxed vibe, you know? You're just chilling. But with the SCL, like I was saying, I mean, the engines are the same, so there's no performance difference, but it almost feels like the SCL is faster because when I get on it, I'm just like already in that like hooligan riding position, and it handles better, and I'm just like itching for a wheelie. It's itching to be thrown into turns. It's itching to find some gravel. But the Rebel's just happy to have you here, you know? It's just happy to putz around, get a coffee, and just vibe. So honestly, guys, I think when it comes down to it, there is no right or wrong answer. There might be a right or wrong answer for you as an individual, but there is no one-size-fits-all answer for everybody as to whether the Rebel 500 is better or whether the SCL 500 is better. And I think that that point is really driven home by the fact that even just within the LifeOfBurch household, there are two differing opinions on the matter. I absolutely love my SCL 500, and I could never give it up for a Rebel 500, whereas Nina is ready to upgrade to the Rebel 500, but could never in her life see herself being on the SCL 500 because it just doesn't work for her. So I implore you that as you're making your decision, sit down and look at your budget, how the bike's going to fit you, and how you plan to use it, and I think within there you'll find your North Star of which bike is calling your name. Shout out to the Patreon members for making all of this possible. I could not be doing this without you. I will catch y'all on the next one. Love you guys. Peace.
Oh, so basic. Hope you play this. Damn, I prayed it. Nice song and I became this. Old souls fake it. Pay those placements. Fuck shit. And I'm still waiting on the brighter days. Been a minute, been rough many times more. And I'm kicking rocks to a sky of gray. Praying hard, talk to me before I'm done for.